So, Dad,
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting a podcast with a friend of mine.
What's that?
It's basically like a radio show, but it's on the
Okay.
internet.
Okay. Make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
Oh, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you don't really believe me, do you?
Oh, yeah.
You don't.
Welcome to Polite Conversations with Eiynah and Paul. We promise this to be a place where there will be nothing controversial ever discussed by anyone about anything. Sex? Nope. Politics? Definitely not. Religion? Are you kidding me? You get a female ex-Muslim together who happens to be a minority with a white, ex-military, ex-Christian American male and watch the magic happen. Polite Conversations with Eiynah and Paul. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome, listeners, to Polite Conversations with Eiynah and Paul. Eiynah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited. This time around, we have Connor Habib, a writer, a lecturer, and sex worker advocate. I think we're going to have a pretty good polite conversation.
I sure hope so.
We'll see. With that stellar introduction, let's get you over to our interview with Connor.
Today with us, we have Connor Habib, who's a writer, lecturer, and sex worker advocate. His writing has appeared in Vice, Slate, and Salon. He has appeared in nearly 200 adult scenes and is the vice president of the Adult Performer Advocacy Committee, which works to improve the experiences, safety, and health of porn performers. And he gives talks about sexuality, sex and culture, and pornography around the world. Hi, Connor.
Hi.
Hey,
Thank
Connor.
you so much for joining us today.
I know it was a bumpy road to get here.
It really was. So some background on this. Connor and I met on Twitter virtually, and we did not start off well.
Wait, are you saying somebody didn't get along with you on Twitter, Eiynah?
It's true. I mean, I don't know how this keeps happening over and over again.
Oh, I've got ideas.
But yeah, we yelled and fought with each other, and I think Connor blocked me. I did not block you. And then he unblocked me somehow, and then we started talking and became friends, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably worth going into why we went at each other first, because it's so related to topics that you talk and think about. So basically, I had live tweeted watching The Unbelievers, this documentary about Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, and I live tweeted it because I am not a fan, particularly of Dawkins. I know much less
Really?
about
I
Krauss.
did not notice that.
I'm totally shocked by that revelation.
Right, and so we didn't know each other. So I know, like, somehow found, I don't know how you found it, but like came across my Twitter feed and then sort of started pulling apart some of the things I said, and then it got like heated. And a lot of people started piling on me because of those comments, and then people who follow me started, sort of fighting back. And in the meantime, what it ended up was I started sort of talking in the background in DMs while all the fighting was going on that we inspired, and we.
It was a Twitter follower face-off.
It was, and so, but basically, it was, me trying to sort of explain my position, why Dawkins in particular, but some of the stuff in that movie was so problematic to me, where I was coming from, because I have a science background, and where she was coming from, because she has a background defending LGBT people, defending people's, right to sexuality, their own sexuality and sexual autonomy and all that sort of stuff. And we're just like, wait, actually, like, under normal circumstances, we would think that we were awesome, but it was just because this like one contentious thing came up.
Right.
And so, but that to me is really telling, because it's like, there's so much intense feeling around, you
Religion.
know, around religion, and in my case, around sort of scientific beliefs and that sort of stuff. Sorry, I know beliefs is not perhaps the right word here, but around scientific worldviews. And so I think, and who gets caught in the crossfire, and what kinds of conversations are being maybe blocked or cut off, and who might be allies and against fundamentalisms.
Right. And I think it's interesting because you're right. Under other circumstances, I think we could be, and, we possibly can be now, great friends and hang out at, if we were to meet at a party, we'd have a great time, I think, as long as religion didn't come up, right? Everything else, I think, I assume you consider yourself a liberal, right?
Well, I would not call myself a liberal. I would say that I'm not even a leftist. I don't like
Oh,
any of those. I
interesting.
don't like any of those terms. I am so on beyond all of that that it doesn't that I don't like those. I don't like those words. I mean, I think just to clear something up, and maybe this is like meat for a discussion between us, because my thing was not really about religion in criticizing that movie. It actually was about not thinking that Richard Dawkins is a rigorous thinker or very scientific in his thinking. That really was my issue. And of course, I was making dumb jokes. Like, it wasn't all serious. It was not serious critique. It was sort of like, I know who follows me. I know, like, what a lot of them think. I know where a lot of them are. A lot of it was just sort of like, joking and nudging to the choir and the people that, are sort of on board with where I'm at. But, when it comes to religion, and I think that, as you and I started talking more and elaborating, I think, again, we agree a lot there, especially with how religion plays out for people's lives and people's freedom. And so, and individualities. And so I just wanted to sort of get into that a little bit, because my problem with Dawkins and some of these people is really their views on science, not their views on
But
religion.
I mean, I've seen you tweet about other atheists too. It seems like there's some hard feelings or misunderstandings or dislike um, towards other
Yeah,
atheists.
you've even said,
figures.
Connor, I've seen in your timeline that you've even said that, trying to take a progressive view on atheism, that's a great thing, but that we need to find new spokespeople.
Please feel free to come at me, because I mean, not in a mean way, although if
No,
you want to do that, do
No,
that.
this
But
is
only
polite
because, like,
conversations. We're not
this
going to
is
come
called
at
polite
you.
conversations.
well, I need to be pushed more, because I don't have these kinds of conversations enough,
Right.
right? And so I don't have anything, I'm not afraid to have a conversation with people who are genuinely interested in having a conversation, right? So yeah, I mean, there are lots of atheists that I am really invested in their work, and I think that they're amazing. And some of them are alive, some of them are dead. It could be Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst. It could be who's dead. It could be Camille Paglia, the art theorist and feminist, or it could be some of my best friends are atheists, which is
But
a
are
joke,
these
but
people that don't challenge religion head on?
they do, but it's often not their main task, in the sense of, it's not like you have I'm trying to think of a really good one. It's not like you have Sam Harris, right? Because even with Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss and Daniel Dennett, they have other huge projects that they're working on. But it's sort of like the atheism has almost eclipsed those when it comes to the public eye. But
Because
when
I think it shows how much it's needed, like how well people respond to it. There's a lot of people that have been feeling isolated and alienated and in need of seeing religion discredited. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't think that there are enough voices doing that out there. And that's why I think I agree with you as well that maybe not replace the old voices, but add to them as well. We definitely need more women, more people of color for sure.
That 100%. I feel like a diversity in atheist voices, not and also atheists, the kinds of faces we're seeing
Yeah.
related to atheism are really crucial. I don't. I mean, my main teacher in life, my main teacher, like my main mentor, the one I was closest to, who was like my second mother, was an atheist, a very distinguished scientist named Lynn Margulies, who she was a biologist, microbiologist, a geoscientist, and she discovered that our cells are proved basically that our cells are symbioses of different kinds of bacteria. She was married to Carl Sagan for a long time, so I'm really good friends with their son, Dorian Sagan. I mean, that community and her view on these things were, to me, much more nuanced, much more profound, much more interesting. And her science was right. In a way that Dawkins' science, to me, is not correct.
See, we'll get to that. That's a very interesting point you make.
So I want women to have more of a place in this. Now, let me full disclosure. I'm not an atheist. So
I gathered.
you know that, right? And so I'm not trying to hide here. I just wanted to say that so it didn't seem like I was trying to hide behind like, oh, I just want like cooler, hipper atheists. But by the way, I'm not really an atheist. Like I'm not. However, the atheist perspective in many ways has been the perspective of my main teachers and many of my main teachers in life. And so I have so much value and respect for it. It's just that it doesn't completely fill out my system and my perspective of the world.
But it's interesting when you say that Dawkins, your critique of him is science-based, which I've heard so many people hate on Dawkins before. For so many reasons, right? And it doesn't, he's not really my prophet or anything. Like people like to lay this charge on a lot of atheists that, oh my gosh, you guys worship these people just like they were your gods or prophets. So it doesn't bother me at all that people, hate on him or criticize him. Sure, but I just am bothered when the criticisms towards anyone are unfair, because I like that. So, okay, fine. You were making fun of. I don't know whether he has sex or not, or crosses shoes. Sure, those are small things, but there are other charges laid on him, like he's a complete racist or whatever, which I disagree with. Sure, I've heard him say things on Twitter that I find to be bigoted sometimes, and I won't agree with him 100% all the time. But to call him a flat out racist, I think reduces the meaning of the word. Like we've seen this a lot, like with people laying the charge of racism on others for anything. I've been called a racist. I've been called a white supremacist just for criticizing the religion that I was born into. So, I don't want to see that word reduced to nothing because it's an important word. And when someone is a racist, I want it to mean something. I don't want just every other person to be called a racist. Am I making sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think that we live in a time, especially like on Twitter and social media, we encounter something which is like, it really is a religious culture of social justice in a lot of ways, where it is based on principles of purity. Like we need to expunge any sort of anything that looks challenging to us on any of these levels. Like I think it's almost like a purity culture in some ways.
Yeah.
And I find that highly problematic.
Yeah.
However, let me just sort of step back and say, I can't remember if I've ever called Dawkins a racist. Maybe I did in that thread. Maybe I didn't. I'm not sure. I don't keep track.
I wasn't speaking about you specifically, but
no, but it's certainly possible that I've said that. Let me just say, like, I grant that I might have said that. Let me tell you where I think that some of that is coming from and why I think there's even if it's not exactly the way we would say a skinhead is racist or someone in the KKK is racist, it does brush against these things. Even when we take this sort of atheist movement back to Bertrand Russell, who is a pacifist, who's really a foundation for a lot of thinking of these sort of figureheads of atheism right now. He supported colonialist wars. He was a pacifist except for colonialist wars, which he sort of came up with this weird, backwards, crazy straw logic about how, like, well, it ends up being like really great for all of us. It's like this sort of, and I think that what people are encountering is.
But you have to look at that in context of the times he was in as well, right?
100%, although he did stand up against a lot of other things that in the context of his time, he was ahead of his time.
We don't know what exactly we're going to see as wrong and not wrong when we compare it to the morals of today, right? Like
you're right. I'm just sort of like, I'm starting what I'm saying from him, right? So I think when it comes to Dawkins, Harris, these sort of people, there's an idea, and a sense that there's an extension of a colonialist project going on. And I do think that that's true. Now,
I
do
feel
I
like
think
that's
that
a bit conspiracy theorist, isn't it? Like,
I don't think they're all
what
in
do you
it
think their
together,
end
right?
goal is? Like to just westernize everyone and eradicate, I don't know,
Mm,
brown cultures or
No, I don't think it's. First of all, I don't think that they have their finger on the button of the bomb or anything like that, and I don't think that it's necessarily conscious. There are maybe some people that maybe it's a little more conscious than others, but I don't. But let me just say, like, I don't necessarily even think that colonialism and racism, I mean, these are different currents of
Hmm?
problem as well. So we should first separate that out. They overlap in a lot of ways, but they're different currents. But I also think that what people are seeing is this, or what people are getting is a sense that the extension of that project is happening in a lot of these thinkers, because it it is there is a lot of rhetoric that seems like that, and it's difficult to untangle that. So when you
But
say
even when it's not like that, people turn it into that, like, say,
Mhm.
me challenging the niqab, which is the face veil. So many people have come at me and say that I'm some pro-imperialist person that wants to, get rid of brown people's cultural dresses, and
Well,
it's bullshit.
anybody who's not a Muslim or has never been a Muslim is misstepping in saying that to you, because
What about Muslims who are using that as cover to say that to me?
yeah, well, again, I can't really speak to that. Like, I I can speak to the people who aren't, because I'm not. I've never been Muslim. I wasn't raised Muslim. I'm not, I'm half Arab, but that's it. So, but what I'm trying to say is, like, you have a right to say that. Like,
Mm,
I mean, you have a right to, like, speak out against all
absolutely,
of
I
that,
think so.
and that somebody wants to remove that from you is itself, in some bizarre way, a colonialist project. You have the right to say that. My stance on this is, like, if you're not a Muslim, like, listen to Muslims and ex-Muslims and their discussion, and let whatever the truth is rise out of that discussion,
Mhm.
not impose it
However,
from
the
the outside.
majority amongst us is Muslim. So those are the people getting the platforms, the voices, the solidarity. Everyone's like, oh, let's wear a hijab for a day, solidarity. Like, these are the things that have, and symbols that have oppressed us for decades. So that's hardly a show of solidarity. When women are lashed for not wearing a hijab, it's really weird to see in the West that it's become like a symbol of solidarity. Sure, I
Right.
understand that bigots on the street will rip women's hijabs off, and I can't, stand that either. But I don't think that we need to don a misogynistic symbol to show that we're anti-Muslim bigotry. You know?
It's very, yes, I agree with you in a lot of ways. My friends with Mona El-Tahawi, who wrote the book Headscarves and Hymens, which is
Hmm.
very,
She
very
gets a
critical.
lot of hate from these
Totally.
hijabi Muslimas, by the way, who are all about intersectional feminism otherwise, because they feel that that's the only way their brand of, quote unquote feminism can be included, because their feminism works within the framework of the religion that is already provided to them. So headscarves and all of that is part of their feminism.
Something I take from her, and sort of going into what you just said, something I take from her is that it's not necessarily my place to decide what's right and what's wrong within
No, but
Muslim.
I'm within minorities, like, it's not, I can say I'm not
Yeah.
gay, so it's not really my place to speak out against homophobes. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, no, you could say that you're not gay, so it's not your place to speak out against gay marriage, which there is a lot of debate about that within the gay community.
mhm,
However, the queer community, which has been pretty vocal against gay marriage within the gay
right,
community,
right. But
um,
if the gay community,
doesn't get any support from any sort of mainstream voice. So what I think my job is to do, and one of the reasons why I'm happy I'm having this discussion with you, is to allow and sort of empower more place for
mm,
voices that are critical of that within that community. So at least there's some chance of equal footing. Like, I can't say right or wrong, but I feel like your voice and the voices of people that are critical of it within that community are being drowned out simply by numbers, if nothing else.
Mhm.
And so there's that aspect to it, and that's something Mona really taught me. It was like, you don't have to jump in and like do anything in our argument and prove who's right or who's wrong, but give me space to say
Yeah,
this.
and I appreciate that. But then
Yeah.
I think this is why movies like The Unbelievers have been so important to
Mm,
me, even though you know, from your perspective, you've grown up, I'm assuming, in the States and
yes.
had freedom generally to do whatever. Um, there was nothing for me. There's been no one in my corner to challenge religion, which
Right.
I've felt has been oppressing me a lot. Even though my family's really liberal, it's not them that have imposed religion on me. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, so it was the state that imposed it on me, and just even liberal religiosity feels like an imposition to me. And there has
Yeah.
been nothing and no one. I mean, my disbelief has been challenged all the time and laughed at and mocked, but I cannot have that same right. So I feel like voices that are becoming larger and larger, like Sam Harris, Dawkins, they play that role of maybe mainstreamizing that conversation, which has never been done for especially Muslim dissenters. So I appreciate them in that regard. However, I do think that they have a lot to learn. Uh, about speaking on Islam from ex-Muslims so that they don't repel certain groups of people, because sometimes
Right.
they are blunt, sometimes they don't understand it as well, or they may say something that upsets people simply out of not knowing how to speak about the subject. But I do see them ultimately as allies.
I really appreciate what you're saying in the sense that I can view them as a sort of gateway drug to
Right,
atheism,
right.
but in a positive sense, of course. I just want to address that atheism or religious belief or whatever, or freedom of speech, a lot of different sort of principles and perspectives. I mean, the context surrounding them is important. Being an atheist in Saudi Arabia is far more radical than being an atheist in New York City, right? It's like, and I
But New
don't,
York City, once upon a time, it wasn't so easy to be an
no,
atheist.
no, you're absolutely right. But I'm just talking about right now, right?
Yeah.
So, in the context of my viewing of a movie about Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, my critique is not a critique of ex-Muslims
No, I
fighting
know.
against their governments and stuff. But I think that actually gets conflated. Maybe not by you, but I think that gets conflated by people sometimes. It's like in the context of in the different context, this movie has a different meaning than it does to you. And I value the way you talk about these people. I value that, and I think that
Thank
that's
you.
really important. Yes, I do.
Um, I value your openness to have these discussions. So I think that's great that we're coming at it from such opposing angles and able to have a productive discussion about it. I
It's
think that's what.
amazing, isn't it? What an example it can set for so many people.
Because usually people just hate on each other, and
Yeah,
that's the end of the conversation. That's what happened with us initially,
you
right?
throw
And
verbal grenades and then you move on to the next target. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to be pushed. I read your article that you wrote in Vice about the LGBT community kind of recreating Christian
Mm,
theology, and I would
yeah,
love for
that
you
one.
to be able to kind of educate our listeners on that. So
right.
help us understand, please, because I don't get it. I read the article, and it looked like this group was trying to reframe an ideology which had condemned, damned, ostracized them for 2,000 years, and they were
Right.
reframing it in a way that made it safe and cuddly for them, so they could embrace the very things in that ideology that they could get outside of the ideology. So if you could talk to that
Right.
article, and then what utility does it have for any LGBT member to reframe any religion in such a way? What does that do for that individual?
Right. So before you go back on, let me just say one thing, which is that I reported on that. That's
Okay,
not necessarily my take on it. So
gotcha. Okay.
I'll speak to it, but I just want you to know that as I go
No, thank
into
you.
it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So something to keep in mind is that even people who are sort of hardcore atheists, a lot of them say that religion is, or belief in some way, is sort of quote unquote hardwired into our system, right? Or you could go to other atheists who are not, evolutionary biologists like Freud, who said the same thing. You could go into a lot of places that say you can't really get away from this impulse. It's part of being human. It's just how you sort of deal with it and move around with this impulse, how you sort of shift it in your life. So there are groups of LGBT people who do something called queer theology, which is looking into religion for a sort of literary lesson. Like Marxists will sometimes do this with Christianity as well. They'll say, look, what does it mean that this person who ended up leading this huge group of people was a poor carpenter who gave himself up to the poor to be killed by the government? What does that mean? And of course, look, we can take a lot of interpretations of that if we want. I don't want to get into the various well, it could also mean, I'm just saying this is some of the work that's being done to sort of roll with this fact that, and again, a lot of scientists and psychologists and psychiatrists, et cetera, believe that this is true or understand this is true, that you can't get away from religious impulse entirely. You have to do something with it, just as you have to do something with hunger or lust or other aspects of being human, that for some reason...
Do you think the impulse isn't really religious impulse, maybe just a tribal connectivity kind of thing? Because
yeah, maybe.
I see a lot of people getting away from religion without any problems, but needing to connect with another community. I think we're just communal beings,
right?
And we get a sense of completion when we, hang out with other people who think like us or believe in the same thing or don't believe in the same things as us.
It might be tribal, or it
So I
might
can't
be
see the comparison of a religious impulse with, like, what was it that you compared it? Lust or...
like some sort of drive. I mean,
I
that's
don't
not...
see it as so natural. I feel like it's completely manufactured.
Here's the thing. I don't see it that way either. I'm speaking to the idea that people are sort of rolling with religion. I mean, you'll have to look into the evolutionary
Yeah.
biologists that say religion is a function of, an evolutionary development. I mean, if you want to...
And again, I'll say that that's probably they're referring to tribalism. I can see that. Like,
They might be. I would take a sort of more psychoanalytic view because I do have some understanding of psychoanalysis, which is that we all experience something, especially in Western culture. I can't speak to every culture, but we experience a sort of lack, a missingness in our lives, and that missingness is always there as a longing. And so a lot of people try to fill that longing with God because it's a sort of good fit for that space, because you're constantly longing for something you can't encounter, so you feel comfortable with
that's not
longing.
necessarily, again, a religious thing. You can fill it with
No,
art. You can fill it with whatever.
exactly.
Some people fill it with drugs, sex, whatever.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I just think I'm just telling you, so trying to go through some of the theories of why people have religious longings and why a group like an LGBT or a queer group would try to do something with the Bible, even though it might have been historically used to oppress them in their lives. It's sort of a conscious subversion of the impulse. Like, well, I was wounded by religion, but I still, for some bizarre reason, have this impulse. So let me do something with it.
That's really interesting.
Okay.
The way that you put it.
I don't feel that way. I was raised, by the way, aspiritually, completely aspiritually. I had the freedom to interact with religion however I wanted. My mother... my father's from Syria, from a little village in the mountains of Syria that was sort of Christian / gypsy supernatural. And my mother was raised by fundamentalists, so she was essentially atheistic. I mean, she wasn't anti-theistic, but she didn't care. She was into philosophy. So she took me to a bunch of churches. She's like, do you like any of these? Do you not like any of these? What do you think? And out of that, my interest in any sort of spiritual stuff grew out of a complete place of freedom. The thing that wasn't free was the surrounding community where I grew up in small town Pennsylvania, which was in some ways fundamentalist, definitely anti-gay, racist, all that kind of shit.
Right.
And so it was against that backdrop. But within the home, at least, I was pretty free to pursue however I wanted. So that to me was a great fortune. I mean, I'm very lucky to not have been violated by religion as a child, as many people are.
Right.
Right.
However, like the scriptures still exist. Like you can see the misogyny and the homophobia
Totally.
there, right?
Yeah.
So it's
And not on board with any of it, obviously.
and that's amazing. But what I think, and what I don't understand, and what I think Paul is trying to understand, and you explained it really well by saying there's a desire to fill something, there's a longing, and people fill that with God sometimes. And I see that in the Muslim community too, like with LGBT Muslims, they need the space to to connect to their past in form of religion while still while still expressing their sexuality, and it doesn't
Mm.
necessarily fit because the two things are in such opposition, especially in Islam, because it hasn't been defanged or watered down in any way. Like the homophobia is still very much at the
Well,
surface.
and that's why I didn't understand. That's why I could not get the utility out of that article, Connor, was because it didn't seem, just like you're saying, Eiynah, you can't serve two masters, for lack of a better way to put it, and have, I don't see how you can have that cognitive peace. You can't ever achieve that. One's got to
However,
give
letting
way to the other.
go
Yeah,
of
you let
something.
go, and because all of those things that reframed Christian theology would provide to them, they could find amongst, like you were saying earlier, a group of like-minded individuals. They
No,
don't.
sure they can, but what I'm saying is that sometimes it's so hard to let something unravel to that extent, something that has been a part of your life. Like not everyone can take that leap. And instead of, I come across a lot of people on Twitter that always say like, you can't be gay and Muslim, you should be one or the other. And either that's coming from Muslim bigots who are saying you can't be gay and Muslim, so stop being Muslim, or anti-Muslim bigots want to say that because people are gay, because they might have more liberal beliefs, they are no longer Muslim. So only the most horrible hardline fundamentalists are the people they will identify as Muslim, and that way they are justified to hate all Muslims. And I think both angles are ridiculous because we need to give people space to question and to be on their own times. It may not make sense, perhaps, and it
Right.
doesn't make sense to me
Let
either.
me let me reframe what you said in another way too. It's not it breaking from the system happens for some people, right? Like, so you guys are atheists, you have this sort of break where you're allowed to just sort of step outside and be like, fuck that. Like, I'm not into it anymore,
Right.
and have this like, but for some people, for whatever reason, it could be family, personal, cultural, it could be law. It's
Hmm.
not so easy to break from that
Yeah.
tradition. So, for instance, I think a really great example is talking about money, our economic system, capitalism. There are people who say, I'm a Marxist within a capitalist system. However, like, they still go and buy their shit from Amazon, right?
Oh
Because it's
yeah,
not
I
so
know
easy to
a few of
just go
those.
grow your broccoli in the backyard. Like,
Yeah.
you can't do all of it. It's like, okay, I'm going to plant a seed in myself that allows me to start moving away from this belief system. However, I'm still entrenched in it. It's not so easy to give it up. So I'm going to have to roll with it, work with it in one way or another. And I think that that's what's happening for a lot of people. It's
Okay.
like, I'm still bound to this, and I would maybe like to be free of it, but I don't exactly know how.
Yeah.
And
Right.
for some people, you really do, especially people who are truly deeply wounded, the wound is the break for them. They're like, I'm so wounded, fuck this, I'm out of here. A lot of people aren't that wounded. A lot of
Yeah.
people can't have that traumatic break,
Or
which in
they're
some
even
ways,
more wounded, and this
yeah,
prevents
right,
them from
right,
breaking.
exactly. Yeah, it's an individual experience,
Right.
and let me say, it's something else I learned from knowing a lot about sex, from doing a lot of studies on sex and history and sex and culture. So the default approach to sex in almost any culture at this point is fundamentalism. We have fundamentalist views as a default way of viewing sex. It's very hard for people to view sex in a reasonable way. So even if I talk to people who are atheists, who don't believe in God, who whatever, like, who have, like, don't believe in artificial, arbitrary moral systems, I might say to them, okay, so do you feel okay having this many sexual partners? Do you feel okay being non-monogamous? Do you feel okay, um, doing S&M sexual acts? Do you feel okay? And a lot of them might recoil and be like, no.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
might say that there's something wrong with that, because it takes a lot of deprogramming to
Yeah.
see something in a reasonable way that doesn't have a supporting dying shibboleth of arbitrary morality hanging off of it, right?
Yep.
It's very difficult. So even if you're reasonable in some ways, you might not be reasonable in others.
Yeah.
And
I
so
think religion does that, unfortunately. At least that's the way I see it. It makes you put aside some reasonableness in some instances. You can't. I don't know. Like my doctor always had a cross in his office, and I love him. He's a great doctor, but I'm like, how how are you putting your belief in the supernatural aside, and then being all
right.
sciency? It doesn't make sense to me. But as an outside, like, because I'm so outside of it now, I am all for giving people the space to be their separate, components of whatever makes up their identity. And I don't think it's anyone else's place to tell people what they can and can't be. But from the outside, this makes very little sense.
Do you
You
think
know,
that if you're a marginalized population that plays into it? And I ask that question for a reason. I try to be very empathetic with everyone. So when going back to this article of yours, Connor, I tried to put myself in the shoes of the folks that you were highlighting, and I've got it good. I'm a white straight male in America. I've got it pretty damn good. So if there were any institution that ever rejected me because of who I was, the last thing I would do is embrace any ideology they have and then try to reframe it to be copacetic with the way I wanted to see the world or the way I did see the world. So maybe that's where I'm missing it, and a lot of our listeners may miss it, is because especially on my show, a lot of my listeners are white men. Does that play into it?
Okay, so let me just say that I hear what you're saying, but I also think if we look a little more into that I wouldn't necessarily believe what you're saying.
Okay.
And what let me tell you what I mean. I think we all have fundamentalism like woven into us in one way or another, right? So on the one hand, you're saying I don't have. I mean, I realize that you're talking sort of specifically about religion in this case, that you wouldn't sort of try to weave in a belief system that was oppressive to you in a way that you agree with. However, most people, even straight white men, have jobs that they go to and sometimes work 70 hours a week. Sometimes people, or the sexual component I talked about before, a lot of times we do try, and work can be so damaging to the psyche, can be damaging to the body. More people die from work-related injuries and then work-related illnesses, and then they have work-related injuries. This insane amount of people, and then dying on the way to work, on the way back to work. This whole system of work is so damaging to people, and yet we've completely internalized and woven that into the way that we think. Well, I have to go to work. I have to work
well,
for a
that's
living.
because
I have
it
to.
sustains us, like physically. We don't really have a choice.
Well, right, but isn't that interesting? We might actually have an option if we decided collectively, well, I don't want to work anymore. Oh, I don't want to work
Well,
anymore. I don't want to work.
collectively, yeah, but how? I mean, you've seen the human race. We're a terrible bunch. We can't get along. We can't collectively decide anything, really.
No, I agree with you, but what I'm addressing is that this is, again, a collective, like religion, is a collective problem that's really damaging to human beings in a lot of ways, right? But we don't go against that because it's such an embedded fundamentalism that we even say obscene things like, I have to work for a living. Well, no, you really don't. It's just that somehow we've all bought into this idea that we have to do that. But
Right.
really, we could do things collectively differently. So what I'm pointing out by bringing all this up to you in response to your question is that I think we all have belief systems that we absorb and are so embedded in us that we can't even imagine a world without them. So go then, take that, find that in yourself, and look at someone who's experiencing this religious trap. Maybe you've gotten out of that one, but they're experiencing that in the same way that you're experiencing whatever fundamentalism it is that you can't sort of get out of, that you keep brushing up against, that is almost impossible for you to leave or even imagine what it would be like to leave that. That's what a lot of people are experiencing. And
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, I love that.
But
and
I
so
do think there should be a distinction between physical things and like things that are in our head, you know? Like
yeah.
this work thing is physical and we're trapped by the work week, like physically, by our bills, our houses, our mortgages. This religion thing is mostly um, what we're told to believe. There's nothing physical. There's no God that's going to come down and strike us dead if we're not going to do it. Or
Right, but the state will in some cases, right? Like you said, the state
yes,
that's inspired by religion in certain countries will come and
yes,
kill you,
yes,
right?
in those countries. But let's say here.
And in okay, but let me just say, like in the Soviet Union, if you didn't work, like work was pretty much the stand-in for God in that place. Like you'd be fucked, right? Like if you weren't working for the
I mean,
state.
it is here too,
Right.
right? North America, a little bit.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's just that you passively starve to death. It's not,
Yeah,
they don't come in like, but they will take your house. They
yeah,
will like kick you out on the street. They will take
yeah.
your health insurance away.
I mean,
I
I
mean,
do see it. I see what you're saying. I just see them as two different. It's an interesting way of framing it, but I see a distinction between the
I,
physical and the non-physical.
I see it. I see it too. I see that there's a distinction between the things I'm saying. It's not an exact analogy.
Right.
And we can pick apart the analogy as much as we want. I'm just trying to sort of talk about the way we experience our belief and relation to something. And some people are experiencing a connection to religion that is as strong as some of the things that we feel and take for
Yeah,
granted.
and
And I think that that's what's happening.
that's hard to understand for people on the outside, I think.
It's really hard, and it's especially I think hard for people that have left in a way
Hmm.
when they haven't left slowly or gradually, when they've left through
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
break. There are people that can lead through a path. These are the things that you can do to start. And I wish that that were part of the atheist discussion more, because I think that that would be brilliant. These are steps you can take to gradually get out of this mindset.
I think
Not
it is. I mean, there's a lot of ex-Muslims and stuff that are
there are.
helping other people questioning. It's just that these voices need to be given more platforms. They're not, especially ex-Muslims are drowned out and silenced, as you can just tell from me telling you how many times this podcast has been. Uh, my
And
Facebook was suspended twice because people don't want me saying anything. Meanwhile, neo-Nazi accounts are alive and well. ISIS accounts are alive and well. Uh,
that's absolutely crazy. I mean, you can't like Facebook removed two guys kissing from
yeah,
Facebook, right? But like would leave neo-Nazi
yeah,
accounts or like you're saying ISIS accounts. It's
yeah.
like,
Yep.
yeah, it's
It's
crazy.
crazy. And I remember you made such an interesting point when we had our little pre-chat when we were speaking about the um, the idea of Muslims and ex-Muslims challenging from within the community and how it's different when people challenge from outside. Like when you were talking about Dawkins and Harris, and then you made a connection to the sex work industry,
Yeah.
where when people challenge from within, it's different when, say, someone anti-sex worker will say the same point, but it will have a more malicious undertone to it. Do you
Right.
remember having that conversation? I think that
Yeah.
was really an
Yeah.
interesting one.
Because what I said, and again, it is different in these two communities. What I would do is for hours, like I'll talk to some sex worker who disagrees with me. I'll go at it for a really long time. If some like dumb anti-sex work feminist shows up and is like, oh, and you guys are all being coerced and like blah blah blah, I'll be like, just you're a bigot. I have no time for you, right?
Mhm, mhm,
That's within my community versus without my community. The
mhm.
responsibility I have. However, it is a little different for you because the people that you're fighting with in your community have such a drastic there might be a drastic difference in power, right? So someone who is a Muslim but is like has all kinds of state and police power behind them arguing with you, that's not a lateral conversation.
Yeah,
That's you talking to power. Whereas for me in the sex work community, it's pretty much lateral.
yeah,
you know? So it is a little different, but I think that you could say, okay, maybe I'll have a conversation with a Muslim who just is like hanging out with their family, who disagrees with me. I might get into it with them for a long time, but I'm not going to entertain someone who has a shitload of money, like fighting against and power fighting against me. You know what I mean? Like, I think that maybe
and that's where the importance of recognizing intent comes in. And I'm just going to read a tweet of yours that I read. It's It says Dawkins, Harris, and Marr are as responsible for
Oh.
violence against innocent Muslims and Arabs as Donald Trump. Same sentiment, same hate.
Uh-huh.
So I I I just think that there are very different groups here, and we need to really make that distinction. I can clearly see the difference between Dawkins's critique, Harris's, and then Donald Trump's on the other side. And truly, you don't see that.
No, well, it's funny because I was thinking, gosh, like I wonder if like the people listening to this are really like down with what I'm saying right now. And then when you read that, I was like, okay, now they're all gone.
Oh.
But it's fine. I said it. I have to stand by what I say. Or drop what I say because it's unreasonable.
Right. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I just am
Put me on
truly
the spot,
curious.
it's fine. It's your podcast. I am. Yes, I do think it's actually similar. What I don't mean is, okay, look, if Donald Trump becomes president of the US, obviously he has more power, and obviously at that point it's a power differentiation.
It's not about power though. I'm asking about intent.
Oh, you're asking about, do I think
The
they have
same sentiment, same hate.
Yes, I think that the intent between those people. Notice I didn't say Sarah Palin. I think her intent would be different than Donald Trump's, actually. I think that I'm trying to think like some other GOP candidate who I think actually wants to like murder, that like actually want Muslims like shot or rounded up and killed directly in this. I think that that's actually different. Donald Trump,
different,
however,
but Donald Trump just wants them banned.
yes, and I do think that there's a lot of crossover. I do think there's a lot of crossover in rhetoric between those people.
I think that to the naked eye, to the inexperienced eye, perhaps it may seem like he criticizes Islam and Muslims, and they criticize Islam and Muslims. So that's the crossover. And I mean, I've got liberal Muslim family members who joke with me and say that, oh, because I criticize Islam, I'm like Fox News, and I'm like, you're insane. Like, if you can't see the difference, my intent is not to demonize immigrants, and neither is Dawkins, is in my view. Perhaps you view it differently, but I see Donald Trump as clearly having no compassion for immigrants of any kind, let alone not just Muslims, and just an open bigot. At least he's honest about it. Like, he's just, and I respect that honesty. You want to be a bigot? Be honest about it.
Well, see, but I don't think he is honest about it, or maybe he is. I don't know. But when he says, as he often says, like, well, my Muslim friends thanked me for that comment. They said, hey,
I had a Muslim friend thing.
Yeah, something's going on in our community and we need to investigate what it is. He said that. And to me, that rings very similar to comments that Harris is actually exceptionally problematic for me in a way that I don't even really like talking about him.
Okay, let's talk about Dawkins.
Okay, so we can talk about Dawkins or Bill Maher or whatever, but it's just too much to talk about Sam Harris right now. Not even because of his atheism, but there's so many philosophical, logical fallacies, all these kinds of things in his work that like are really bothersome to me. But Dawkins, when he says things like that we need to investigate, that we need to sort of investigate the problem of Islam, but then also isn't Islam as a whole just sort of absurd? And
but I mean, what's wrong with that?
No, there's nothing wrong with it, except that it's incorporated into an overall critique that I find problematic. An overall critique that says that we're sort of missing the boat by defending Muslims, by defending Muslim belief systems, all
but
that.
There is a kind of gut reaction now to combat Donald Trump. You must be defensive about Islam and shriek about Islamophobia. The reason I find that term problematic is the fact that it conflates bigotry towards people with a dislike of an ideology, right? So Islamophobia should actually be Muslimophobia, in
Right.
my view.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting. Maybe Islamophobia is actually a much better word for it. I think that might be a more careful word.
because as
Right.
an apostate, Islam, has hadiths and stuff commanding that I should be killed. Why, I'd be an idiot not to be phobic of it. Of
Right.
course, I'm gonna be terrified of an ideology or dislike an ideology that wants me dead. Why not? There's nothing wrong with me disliking it. And it's not specific to Islam. I dislike Christianity. I just dislike Hinduism.
Hmm.
I have nothing, no personal hate, except for Islam is the one that damaged me most. But anyways, let's get back to Dawkins versus Trump. I think their intents are very different. Dawkins wants to discredit religion. He talks a lot about Christianity too.
Mhm.
Like it's not like he misses the mark sometimes when he talks about Islam, but even when he says the simplest things like Islam needs a feminist revolution, people are up in arms like, "Oh, don't mansplain to me."
Yep.
And I'm like, but the entire book is mansplaining to you. That's what religion is. It's mansplaining. Why are you angry at Dawkins?
Yeah, right. Religion, like the holy texts themselves, is mansplaining. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's pretty funny. I mean, I think that it, let me just sort of like step back a little bit and say it's not really about Dawkins so much, that tweet, as it is almost about Trump, in the sense that I notice a lot of overlap in the things that he says with the things that Dawkins says. So rather than say like,
But
let's
you
get
might
into
notice that with me too, simply because I will not criticize immigrants or immigration because I'm an immigrant, but I will criticize Islam. And maybe someone on Fox News will say it, but with a different intent, with the intent to demonize immigrants, and my intent is to discredit religion. So there's
Yes,
the difference.
but you went through Islam. That to me is a key difference. When something is woven into at some point in your life and may have sort of been released at some point, woven into your identity, you've experienced it, you've interacted with it, you really understand that this is a version of the Islamic Muslim experience, like for real. This is not bullshit. This is not Islamophobia. This is something that really happened to people, and I know it, and I'm going to talk about my
Mhm.
experiences and what happened. That to me is a key difference there.
I think
So
that Dawkins and Harris and all could do better in terms of speaking up about anti-Muslim bigotry, just so that they can get the uh, many anti-Muslim bigots that do hitch on to this kind of critique of religion and Islam. They hitch on to my work too, but I
right.
have to keep tweeting about how much I hate anti-Muslim bigotry, and then they all surface and get mad at me, and then I'm like, well, get out of here. We're not
Well,
on the same
it
page.
leaves you in a very difficult position, I'm sure, because on the one hand, you want to criticize Islam, and on the other hand, you need to combat bigotry.
Yes.
And so you're in a very lonely position,
Hmm.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that is part of the burden of you being who you are. I experience my own versions of that in the work that I do. I'm not saying it's the same, but I experience my own versions of that kind of stuff, and it can be very lonely. But it's easier to do what people do, which is either this bullshit thing, which I think, and Mona calls this out all the time too, where they're like, well, if you just read Islam the right way, like you just read it the right way, and you will see that like all this is untrue, and Islam is a religion of forgiveness, and blah 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 blah. I don't, as an outsider, agree with that. I would agree that the proper thing to do is say, okay, well, that might have been the correct way to read it then, but we need to start updating this because this is like not working for us anymore. And it's not about interpreting it in a pure way. It's about having more compassion, mercy, and freedom, and that's something different, right? That's an update. That's something different. And we can get into the merits of that or not, but I'm just opposing that to we need the pure reading of Islam, and that will free us, because I don't think that that's true.
Hmm.
Um, Mona pointed that out to me, and I agree with her on that. And I'm grateful that I saw her in action, sort of dismantling someone's argument, a question from the audience
Hmm.
at an event she did. Um, I also think that so we can't take that tact. It's too easy, like by saying, well, if our religion were just pure, if we just really interpret it the right way. We also can't take the tact of like, maybe you can, but I don't feel comfortable taking the tact of like, let's just get rid of Islam, let's just get rid of religion, let's just get rid of. I don't think that
Right. I've
works
seen you
either.
oppose the black and whiteness of a lot of atheists, and I think that it's more nuanced than it may appear to be. I don't think that getting rid of means like let's eradicate it and force people to disbelieve.
No.
Let's get
Right.
rid of it by
That won't work.
educating people.
Educated
Yeah.
out, yeah.
Yeah, but and just quickly, I wanted to ask you about the criticism of Dawkins in terms of science, which I find really interesting because many people criticize him for his
Right.
beliefs in or his critique of Islam, but I've never heard like people, even people who dislike him, always say I respect him as a scientist, but
Right.
you have criticisms of him as a scientist. So I just wanted to get into that quickly before I have to sadly
Yeah,
run away.
I know you have to go soon. I respect him more as an atheist than I do as a scientist
Yeah,
because it seems like that's his true calling.
so
It seems
why?
like he
Why is
really
that?
well, first of all, he has meager experience as a scientist compared to other scientists, right? So most people
I
don't understand that.
disagree.
We call him an evolutionary biologist, but he's not a practicing evolutionary biologist. He's basically a talking head. It's like calling Deepak Chopra a doctor. He does
See,
not
I saw
practice
that
medicine.
comparison on your Twitter and I was blown away because let's just first say what your background in biology is and
Sure.
then go into it.
Sure. So I went to grad school for two things. I went to get my MFA in creative writing. At the same time, though I was not formally admitted into the program, I studied for 3 years doing organismic and evolutionary biology with Lynn Margulies at the University of Massachusetts. So I did basically 3 years of coursework in that program. And that was made available to me because I could take classes in any department I want. I did more work in that program than I did in my MFA program. So just to sort of substantiate, I'm not a scientist. I would be the first to, I'm the first to admit that. I haven't done lab work myself. However, I have a better understanding of science and biology than the layperson,
Right.
did formal education in it at a graduate level. So what I want to say is that I don't know if I can say a majority, but a lot of biologists disagree with the model of evolution that Dawkins has put forward and sort of digs his heels in on. To me, it's not problematic that he has a different view. It's problematic that his view is so popularized because of his continuing to shame and try to discredit, along with some other evolutionary biologists who believe in his theory, these other theories of evolution. What is problematic about that clinging leaves evolutionary biology vulnerable to fundamentalist critiques, religious fundamentalist critiques, who start finding problems with his ideas. Like, oh, well, there's problems with the fossil record, the DNA record, the blah, 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 right? And so this strengthens the fundamentalist side. This strengthens the Christian dissection of this because he's not allowing other voices in. He's not allowing for other theories of evolution, which are way more, to my mind, and to most, at this point, most evolutionary biologists' mind, way more sound, way more
I mean, I don't
scientific.
know the nuances between different views on the theory of evolution, so I can't comment on that. But what you said he has no experience or no lab experience. Like, I was
Yes, some.
speaking to
Yes, some. Yeah,
some biologists about this because I anticipated having this discussion with you,
yeah,
and they're just to get a better understanding of it myself because this was the first time I heard this critique of Dawkins. So I just wanted to like hear what other biologists had to think of him as a scientist, and
yeah,
they all like said these things. Someone said that he was trained by a Nobel Prize winning um, scientist, and he was a lecturer at Oxford. He has a very respectable list of published papers, peer reviewed. um, and also there was a guy who said one should also consider neither Hawking nor Einstein ever had lab experience either. One thing, one of the critical things to remember is that one does not have to be in a lab or on a bench to practice science. That would virtually rule out all theoretical physicists and a good number of astronomers. A lot of valuable work in
right.
cancer research, for example, is being done exclusively computationally.
Well, computation, computers are lab experience at this point. I mean, I need to point that out. I don't like whoever you talk to separate those two things.
Mm-hmm.
Biology, which does use a lot of computation and a lot of models now, that's fine to me. What I'm talking about is he's largely left that realm. I'm not saying that no one can be smart if they've left the realm, or scientifically smart if they've left the realm of laboratory work. I myself do not have laboratory
No,
experience.
but you say like he's not a real scientist. I mean, don't you think that's maybe
I
a
don't
little
what
unfair?
I don't buy the credential. I don't buy the credential as a substantiating factor in his worldview about evolution anymore. I think that that's expired. I think it's an expired credential when it comes to evolution.
But
I
to
think that
compare
there
him to like a charlatan like Deepak
no,
Chopra?
no. What I'm actually doing really, sort of on the outside of that tweet, is comparing him to people who are tirelessly working in labs to understand evolution, constantly doing the work, moving the field forward while he's trying to plant a stake in the ground and stop it from moving forward. And I see that as actually I see that his views on evolution is actually anti-science at this point
Okay, I
because
don't know. I mean,
he's
I
holding it
got
back
no
culturally.
impression that he was being stopping it, but
So let me just like throw out for listeners who want to investigate this further, because we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of
yeah, I
this.
know.
There are great books to look at on this. There's The Paradigm Shifters by Susan Mazur. It has interviews with lots of scientists that disagree with him and that model of evolution. There's Acquiring Genomes by Lynn Margulies and Dorian Sagan. There is a book called Evolution, which is an anthology by Roos and Travis, which are like, it's just a huge tome on different views on evolution. And again, I don't object to his theory of evolution being a component, which is random genetic mutation meets natural selection. We can talk about that later.
I can't.
Personally, we can talk about it. I don't object to that being a component, but what he and some of these other people that hold his view do is totalize this vision of evolution, set it against religion to substantiate what they believe in. So it's a whole big discussion, and we actually probably, for me to talk about it in really plain terms, would have to do another podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to do another podcast with you because can we just take a moment to marvel at the fact that we've had a person who does so many things in the adult film industry, and we spent the whole time talking about atheism and biology and evolution with you.
And it's been
Like, haven't even
respectful and
really talked about
enjoyable.
your sex work advocacy and the other work that you do and how it feels like to be a half Syrian, a half Arab adult film star. That's got to have some really interesting stories to it. And I just feel like we could have gone on for hours. I have to run though, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me just say one concluding thing. This should just take
yeah,
me
absolutely.
just to join onto that. Listen, everybody that's listening to this, you can. I don't mind if people who encounter me as a spiritual person in some way think that I'm delusional. That's okay. I mean, I don't love it, but I don't mind, right? What I mind is that I want to be able to have discussions like the one we've had today, right? Maybe there'd be more contentious points than this. Maybe we get into it a little bit more, but I want those kinds of discussions to happen. I know that I contribute to those discussions not happening sometimes by being a bombastic jerk on Twitter and just saying all kinds of off the cuff, ridiculous things that are over the top sometimes. I understand that. We all do that. That's a human impulse, and I don't mind other people doing that. But what I want through those things is for what you and I did, which is to have that flare up of like ridiculous anger at each other for no reason, and then come and have a conversation like this. It's like, have the anger, then sit down and break bread and see what happens. Because I feel like that will go so much further to healing the diseases of our worldviews than anything else. So
Absolutely. I think reaching out to people you don't agree with is more important than always speaking to people you agree with
Most
because
definitely.
how else do we extend that bridge, right?
100%.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much, Connor, for giving us your time. And I think that we should chat again.
Yes,
We
I
This
will.
time,
agree.
not about atheism and biology, but more about sex.
Okay, all three of us. Let's
There we
talk
go.
let's talk about sex in our DMs.
Let's do it, and then we'll set up a podcast for it.
Perfect.
Awesome.
So Connor,
And-
give folks an opportunity to find your work, some of the stuff you do on your blog, if you want to promote any of your things, please.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, easiest way to find me is just at Connor Habib, ConnerHabib on Twitter. That links to my blog, which is right now. If you just go to connorhabib.com, it'll reroute you to my blog because I'm redoing that site. And that's pretty much it. I mean, that's where everything shows up. So
Excellent.
yeah.
And thank you for your time, Connor. This was enlightening. I really appreciated a level-headed, common sense, communal time with you. I really did. I was really excited about this opportunity.
Thanks. Me too. I promise to lose my shit next time and be a crazy
Good.
person.
Well, if everyone can lose their shit and then sit down and talk, I think it's fine.
Yes.
Everyone
totally.
does, but
They lose their shit and they never find it, so they're
Yeah.
just mentally constipated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
but
All
thank
right.
you.
One more time, we would like to thank Connor Habib for joining us. It was an interesting, stimulating conversation, and I don't think that that's the last time we're going to hear from Connor Habib here on Polite Conversations.
Yeah, we had so much to talk about. I mean, it was barely covered in that, and there's so much still that I'd love to talk to him about.
So-
Interesting guy.
He is. I think we should have him back on.
Definitely.
And I think there's some folks that we need to say thanks to as well.
Yeah, special thanks to the biologists who helped me understand Dawkins from an evolution/biology perspective, at Toxic Path, at Dr. Versovian, at Here Be Nabila, and at Godfrey World. Thank you so much for taking the time. And do check us out on YouTube while our channel still exists, and keep making noise about our polite conversations.
You've been listening to Polite Conversations with Eiynah and Paul. Thank you for downloading and listening to us. If you'd like to hear more of the show's content, head over to YouTube and find us by searching for Polite Conversations Podcast. You can find the wonderful host, Eiynah, on Twitter at Nice Mangoes. No E in mangoes now. And you can find me, her illustrious co-host, Paul Sading, on Twitter as well, at The Q Podcast or at AAP Podcast Show. You can also reach me on Facebook by heading over to facebook.com/The Q Podcast or facebook.com/Atheist Apocalypse. And last but not least, we would like to thank you for being part of the conversation. If there's something you would like to see discussed or you would like to be part of the conversation, you can contact us at verypoliteconversations@gmail.com. And we look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Well, not all of you. You know what we're saying. This is supposed to be polite and all.